Hello and welcome to the day before Thanksgiving episode of Intro to Philosophy. I'm going to give a short lecture on what's called the ontological argument today, and it'll go with the reading in your book, which is called the ontological argument, and hopefully it'll answer some of the questions you might have and put you in a good position to answer the questions that are online for this online class day. So, without further ado, the ontological argument. The ontological argument gets its name from ontos, which is basically the Greek word for being. It's just the argument from being itself is the way to think of it. It was originally given by a guy named Saint Anselm. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury back in the 1100s. And so this argument is almost 1,000 years old, but it's actually one of the newer arguments we have for God's existence. The cosmological argument dates back over 2,000 years, versions of it. The teleological argument is similar, and this one of the big three is probably the newest one at just about 1,000 years old. Saint Anselm came up with this. As far as we know, he's the first person to come up with this argument. All right. Anselm opens up his version of the ontological argument by saying, by talking about the fool. And in particular, he quotes it first from the Bible. He says, "The fool has said in his heart, God does not exist." Or "there is no God," actually, I think is the actual quote. I might be misquoting him a tiny bit here, but it doesn't matter. The fool has said in his heart, God does not exist. There is no God. What does he mean by the fool then? Well, the fool is just an atheist. Nowadays, it's considered bad form to refer to your opponent as a fool at the very beginning of your argument. But in these days, St. Anselm was a monk writing to other monks, and they would have been happy to use this kind of terminology. These days, philosophers still kind of use the term the fool when they're talking about Anselm, just because it's cute and it's kind of fun. But basically, by fool, what we mean is an atheist. Which, of course, Anselm would think is a fool, because Anselm was clearly not an atheist. Most saints weren't. So what's an atheist? Well, an atheist is someone who doesn't believe in God, who disbelieves in God, who actively says there is no God. So far, so good. Anselm simply says, well, okay, if you're really an atheist, that means you don't believe in God, but it doesn't just mean you don't believe in any old God. After all, Anselm doesn't believe in Zeus. That doesn't make him an atheist. To be an atheist means you don't believe in the monotheistic God, the God that Anselm does believe in. You could believe in Zeus and Thor and Loki, and you would still be an atheist by the definition that we're going to be using for atheist. Because atheist means someone who disbelieves in what's often called the Judeo-Christian God. Basically, the God of monotheism, the one we talked about on the first day of philosophy of religion, the omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, creator God that is a person and all that stuff. So, Anselm, what he's going to do is he's going to take all those words we came up with on that first day, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, all that stuff, and he's going to boil them all down into one expression. And he's going to define the word God using that expression. And then he's going to say, if you're an atheist, what that means is you don't believe in this God, the one I'm going to define for you. And you might think it's not fair of Anselm to tell an atheist what they don't believe, but in fact, any atheist will agree with Anselm that they don't believe in this God. So it's not going to be a problem of any sort. The definition he's going to give is going to be one that any atheist would be perfectly happy to tell you they don't believe in. So here's the definition. God is, by definition, the word God means, in other words, he's defining the word God, is the being than which no greater can be conceived. Another way of putting this would be the greatest imaginable being. Two ways of saying the same thing. The greatest imaginable being. The being than which no greater can be conceived. The being you couldn't possibly imagine anything better than, no matter how hard you tried. Atheists think there is no such God. Christians think there is. But all we're doing right now is just defining the term. We're not going anywhere beyond that. Anselm has not given any argument that this God exists yet. He's just defined the word. Okay, so now how does this argument go? Here's where, in doing this argument, you have to sort of put yourself in the position of an atheist, thinking at every step, do I agree with what Anselm is saying at this step, and at this step, and at this step? And that's, if we want to find any problem with the argument, we'll have to approach it from the point of view of an atheist and see whether there's some flaw in the reasoning from one step to another. Okay, so I'm going to erase, so if you need to see this definition, come back to it, and we will. You'll need to remember that definition. The greatest conceivable being. But you can rewind the tape, so there you go. I'm going to draw a little stick figure here. This is the atheist. Alright, now Anselm says the atheist has said in his heart there is no God, or God does not exist. That means the atheist doesn't just use the words. Obviously, the atheist can use the words. God does not exist. But they actually, at the same time, really believe it. Otherwise, they're just using the words. I mean, to be an atheist, you really have to believe there is no such God. So notice the difference. I've got a speech bubble, but I also have a thought bubble. God does not exist. Well, if this is the atheist, the fool, as Anselm says, then if the atheist believes God does not exist, and God is, remember back to the previous board, the being than which no greater can be conceived, it follows that the atheist thinks the greatest conceivable being doesn't exist. And I'm going to add a little expression here. It doesn't exist in reality. Now, I'll tell you why I added that. Because in order for this atheist, so I'm going to speak like Anselm now. Anselm's going to say, in order for the atheist to understand God, to understand what it is we're talking about here, even the atheist would have to admit that this being exists in their mind, exists in the understanding. So God exists in the atheist's understanding. And this might be a funny way of talking to say God exists in their understanding, but the idea is it's supposed to just be a fancy way of saying they can imagine God, or they have a concept of God. Consider Harry Potter. Harry Potter, I would say, Harry Potter doesn't exist in reality. But in order for me to really mean that and understand what I'm saying, Harry Potter has to be something I understand in my head. Harry Potter is in my mind. And in your mind too, probably, and in J.K. Rowling's mind, though not in some other people's, not in everybody's mind. But in order for me to truly deny Harry Potter's existence, I have to have Harry Potter in my mind. Harry Potter must exist in my understanding. But if I'm right, he doesn't exist in reality. That's the kind of existence we care about, really. Anselm gives the example of like a painter who's going to go paint a picture. The painter will, before the picture starts, a lot of the times the painter will have an idea of what the picture will look like in their head. The picture exists in their mind, but then when they actually paint it, the picture then exists in their mind and in reality. But the painter who never gets around to painting the painting only has it in their mind but not in reality, which is what the atheist thinks about God, that God exists in their mind but not in reality. Okay, so Anselm then is going to say, look, if you, the atheist, agree that God exists in your understanding, but deny that God exists in reality, then, says Anselm, you've got a problem. Because it seems to me that you the atheist, I'm being Anselm here, you, the atheist, could think of something better than the thing you're thinking of right now. The thing that's in your head is supposed to be the greatest conceivable being. Otherwise, you're not thinking of God. But Anselm says, the atheist isn't really thinking of the greatest conceivable being. Because the atheist could think of something better than what they're thinking of right now. What could they think of that's better than this greatest conceivable being? Well, to understand that, let's take an analogy here. Take Harry Potter. Can I think of anything better than Harry Potter? Can you think of anything better than Harry Potter? You're not here to answer my question, so I'll just answer for you. Yes, you could. You could think of Harry Potter that not only has magic powers, but also has Superman's powers, right? That would be a better thing, a greater thing than the Harry Potter that exists in your mind. Could you think of anything greater than that? Sure, add the Green Lantern's powers to Superman's powers, and you've got the super Harry Potter Green Lantern Superman being. You could think of something even better than that probably too. Add, Thor and Loki and pick your favorite superhero. Give the being those powers. You could think of something better than Harry Potter. And actually, no matter how amazing you make Harry Potter, you can usually think of something better. That's normal. That's how most things are. But, and here's my visual demonstration. I want to, that being the super duper Harry Potter that's also the Green Lantern and all that stuff that's in your mind, I am greater than that. And let me show you why. Think about that Harry Potter being in your head, and now watch what I can do. I knocked over a marker. The Harry Potter being in your head, however powerful you make them, they can't knock over markers. And why not? Well, y'all are now supposed to say, because they're just in your head. Figments of your imagination don't actually have any power. So it's easy to think of something greater than something that exists only in your mind. Me, I'm greater than something that exists only in your mind. These sunglasses are greater than something that exists only in your mind. Every actual human being is greater than any merely possible human being. And so what could the atheist think of that's greater than the greatest conceivable being in their head? Well, lots of things, probably. Anything that exists in reality. But Anselm thinks in particular, no matter how great they think this being is, they could always think of something better, namely, the same being existing in reality. The same being existing in reality. In other words, if you believed in this being as actually existing, the way that the theist does, then you would be thinking of something greater than the being you're actually thinking of, namely the being that exists only in your understanding. Something that exists only in your understanding is always going to be weaker. And if you know that it only exists in your understanding, or you believe that it only exists in your understanding, then you know that you can conceive of something greater, namely the real thing. So, says Anselm, the atheist wasn't really thinking of God. They thought they were, they used the words, they might even use the exact words that he's using, greatest conceivable being or something. But they're not really thinking of God because they could think of something greater than the thing they're thinking of, and therefore the thing you're thinking of is not God. Therefore, the atheist who says there is no God, God doesn't exist, isn't really thinking about God at all, which means, drumroll, they're not an atheist. The atheist, when they say God doesn't exist, they're using the word God wrong. They're misunderstanding their own words because of this. And therefore, they're actually not an atheist. Their denial of God is not a denial of the God of Christianity, and so it's not a statement of atheism. They might still not be a theist. Now, that's crucial. Just saying they're not an atheist doesn't mean they're a believer in God. It might just be they don't understand the concept of God at all. They might just be ignorant of God completely. But it means they can't be an atheist. So the big result of the ontological argument is, I'll write it up here over the statement of atheism, is that atheism is impossible. That's your conclusion from St. Anselm. Now, I want to stress one thing, and Anselm himself makes this point and is aware of this. That does not necessarily mean that the theist is right. Anselm then goes on to make a further little point that, okay, well, look, I haven't technically proven that God exists. I've just proven that you can't disbelieve in God. But he says, look, if God's existence is so certain that you can't disbelieve in it, that makes God's existence a lot more certain than these sunglasses, which you could disbelieve in these sunglasses. You could be an atheist about sunglasses. You can't be an atheist about God. So Anselm says that seems to put God in a higher category, a more certain category than any of the other things around us. So although I haven't technically proven God exists, I've proven that God's existence is more certain than anything else in the world, if that makes sense. And that is the ontological argument. Basically, he gives a definition of God and argues that the atheist must not be using the definition right when they deny God's existence, because they could conceive of something greater than the thing they're thinking of, namely that same thing existing in reality. Therefore, the atheist isn't really an atheist. There you go. That's the argument. What we'll do is on Monday, we'll talk about some objections to the argument. There have been a lot of interesting objections to it. And there'll be an assignment for you to do online, a little quiz or something now, whenever you're watching this. So go and read the section of the book on the ontological argument. And I will see you all on Monday. So happy Thanksgiving.